The sound of glass shattering against the floor cut through the silence of the room. Victoria stood perfectly still, her hands hovering over the workbench where the latest test had failed. Another attempt. Another failure. She looked down at the workbench, buried under stacks of yellowing papers and handwritten notes that spanned years of trial and error. The air in the laboratory felt stagnant, heavy with the scent of ozone and stale coffee. She reached down, picked up the jagged base of the beaker, and felt the sharp edge bite into her palm. She did not flinch. She simply turned and dropped the glass into the metal bin. It landed with a hollow clatter that echoed against the concrete walls. Her vision drifted across the room, past the rows of inactive equipment and the empty shelves. Every surface was covered in the debris of her pursuit. Her shoulders sagged as she leaned against the desk, the weight of the silence pressing in from all sides. She remained there for a long moment, staring at the empty space where the experiment had been, listening to the hum of the ventilation system as it struggled to pull the fumes from the dim air. She pushed away from the edge of the desk, her fingers brushing against a worn volume of Napoleon Hill resting near a stack of discarded drafts. She pulled the book toward her, thumbing through the pages until they stopped at a dog-eared section on the nature of adversity. She read the lines once, then twice, the words anchoring her drifting focus. There was no sudden epiphany, only a slow, deliberate hardening of resolve. She closed the book and set it firmly back onto the surface, the sound of the cover hitting the wood punctuating the quiet room. The previous frustration began to recede, replaced by a cold, clinical clarity. She turned away from the clutter of the workspace and walked toward the microscope mounted at the center of her station. She pulled the stool closer, the metal legs scraping against the floor. With precise movements, she adjusted the height of the lens, bringing the stage into focus. Her posture straightened, the previous slump of her shoulders replaced by a rigid, intentional stance. She reached for a set of slides, her hands steady, and leaned forward until her eye met the eyepiece. The world outside the lab ceased to exist. Only the work remained. Victoria selected 2 vials from the cabinet, their contents clear and viscous. She placed them under the light, the glass reflecting a sharp, clinical glow. With a steady hand, she drew the first liquid into a pipette and introduced it drop by drop into the second. She watched the reaction through the lens, her breath held tight in her chest. The mixture swirled, shifting from transparent to a deep, opaque amber. She adjusted the dial, increasing the heat beneath the base. The liquid bubbled, rising quickly toward the rim of the container. She reached out, adjusting the pressure valve to stabilize the flow. The reaction slowed, then suddenly solidified. She pulled the beaker away from the heat source and tapped the surface with a metal probe. It rang with a solid, metallic tone. It was durable. It was heat-resistant. She pulled her logbook forward, the pen scratching rapidly against the paper as she recorded the temperature, the ratio, and the final state of the compound. The results were consistent. She looked at the hardened sample, the light catching its surface. And for the first time in months, she did not look away. She noted the time, signed the entry, and turned back to the workbench to begin the next series of stress tests immediately. The screen on her desk flickered to life, showing an email from a major firm. A secure position, a guaranteed salary, a life without the constant threat of failure. Victoria read the subject line, her cursor hovering over the delete icon. She clicked. The offer vanished into the trash bin, and she did not look back. She cleared the space around her workstation, pushing aside the beakers and chemical residue to make room for a different kind of labor. From the bottom shelf, she pulled out a heavy manual on patent law. The pages were thick, dense with complex definitions and strict requirements. She opened her notebook and began to outline the legal framework for her invention. Hour after hour, she translated the language of chemistry into the language of the law. Her pen moved in precise, rhythmic strokes across the paper, mapping out every claim, every limitation, and every potential application. She stopped only to drink cold coffee or to verify a legal precedent in the manual. The lab, once a place of bubbling reactions, became a quiet office of endless drafting. She was no longer just proving a theory, she was constructing a defensive wall around her work. She turned the final page of the manual, picked up a fresh stack of legal forms, and began the 6-month process of documenting her future. The envelope was thick, heavy with official stamps. Victoria tore it open, her eyes scanning the dense, bureaucratic prose until they landed on the word rejected. The claims were insufficient. The data was disputed. She stared at the letter, then let it slide from her fingers onto the floor. Outside, the world continued, but inside the lab, the silence was suffocating. Her bank statement lay on the desk, the balance a stark, dwindling reminder of her dwindling time. She had months of effort and her last reserves of capital tied up in a vision that the system refused to validate. She did not hesitate. She picked up the phone, calling suppliers to sell off the older equipment. The money was wired, and within days, new, high-precision tools arrived at her door. She worked through the night, calibrating the new machinery, her hands moving with a frantic, desperate precision. Every cent she possessed was now invested in a single, final batch of material. If this failed, there would be no more second chances. She watched the pressure gauge rise, her jaw set, monitoring the reaction with a intensity that bordered on obsession. She was no longer just testing a compound. She was gambling her entire future on the hope that this one final sample would stand against the world. The office was vast, smelling of polished mahogany and cold air. Victoria did not wait for an invitation to sit. She walked to the center of the desk and set the small, unassuming tile down. It looked fragile against the heavy wood. The CEO looked from the sample to her, his expression a mask of practiced indifference. He reached into a drawer and pulled out a steel-headed hammer, its weight clear in the way he gripped the handle. He did not look at her as he stood up, moving around the desk to face the tile. The room felt suddenly thin, the air tight. He raised the hammer. Victoria watched his knuckles, white against the grip. He hesitated for a heartbeat, his eyes flicking to the tile one last time. Then he swung. The sound was a sharp, flat crack that echoed off the high ceiling. Victoria did not blink. She watched the steel rebound. The CEO pulled back, his arm stiff. He looked down. The tile sat unmoved, its surface perfectly smooth, not a single fracture marring the finish. He tapped it again, harder this time, then a third time, his face shifting from skepticism to a slow, dawning shock. The silence that followed was absolute, heavy with the weight of something impossible happening right in front of him. The CEO let the hammer drop onto the desk with a heavy clatter. He leaned in, pulling the tile toward the light, his fingers tracing the edge where the steel had struck. He turned the sample over, checking for hairline fractures, but found nothing. He looked up at Victoria, and the indifference was gone, replaced by a sharp, focused intensity. He pushed a stack of papers across the mahogany surface. It was a standard licensing agreement, but to Victoria, the ink looked like a lifeline. She pulled a pen from her pocket. Her hand did not shake. She signed the document, the scratching of the nib the only sound in the room. As she pressed the final stroke, the weight that had been sitting on her chest for years finally lifted. It was not a sudden explosion of joy, but a quiet, hollow realization that the survival phase had ended. The CEO stood, extending a hand to seal the deal. She took it, feeling the firm grip of a man who knew he had just acquired a fortune. She walked out of the office and into the hallway. The fluorescent lights flickered, but they did not seem as harsh as before. She stopped by the elevator, leaned her head against the cool metal door, and drew a long, slow breath. The battle for existence was over. The work was now just beginning. The first contract served as a key. Victoria took it to the aerospace industry, then automotive, then specialized construction. She did not change her pitch. She simply walked in, set the tile down, and let the hammer do the talking. The second firm signed within the hour. The third followed 2 days later. By the end of the month, the fourth company had locked in a global distribution deal. The change was not immediate, but it was relentless. Her mailbox, Inventor graveyard for rejection letters, became a point of constant activity. Heavy, thick envelopes arrived daily, each containing royalty statements that climbed with terrifying speed. The first checks were modest, covering the costs of her next round of research. Then, the figures jumped to 5 digits. She watched the balance on her bank portal update, the numbers scrolling upward like a ticker tape. Soon, the deposits hit 6 figures. She did not buy new things. She did not change her routine. She simply funneled every cent back into the laboratory, filling the empty shelves with precision instrumentation. The scale of her operation shifted from a one-person struggle to a coordinated machine. She spent her days managing global patents, and her nights refining the next generation of materials. The expansion was absolute. The lecture hall was silent, save for the hum of the ventilation system. Victoria stood at the center of the stage, the light from the overhead projectors catching the dust motes dancing in the air. Below her, rows of young researchers sat with notebooks open, their pens poised. A student in the front row stood up, hand raised, and asked the question she had heard a dozen times before. How did she bridge the gap between a failed experiment and a global industry standard? Victoria did not reach for a slide deck or a complex technical chart. She walked to the large, clean whiteboard at the back of the stage. She picked up a black marker, the cap clicking as she pulled it off. She wrote in large, block letters, persistence. She paused, the marker hovering against the white surface for a heartbeat. Then, beneath it, she wrote, execution. She set the marker down on the ledge with a sharp final tap. The audience watched the words. She looked out at them, seeing the same desperate hunger in their eyes that she once held in her own dimly lit lab. She saw the potential for their own future breakthroughs. She felt the weight of her journey, not as a finished chapter, but as a bridge for them to cross. She walked off the stage and pushed through the heavy doors into the quiet of the hallway. Her phone buzzed in her palm. She tapped the screen, opening the portfolio dashboard. The numbers refreshed. The total cumulative value blinked in crisp, green text, crossing the $1 million threshold. She did not linger on the screen. She locked the phone and slid it into her pocket, the action automatic and devoid of ceremony. Her destination was back where it started. She pushed open the lab door and stepped into the cool, controlled air of her workspace. The room was no longer dim. High-intensity lights flooded the benches, illuminating every surface. She reached for her protective goggles on the hook by the entrance, the plastic cool against her skin. She pulled them on, the strap snapping into place behind her head. She walked to the central workbench, cleared a small space among the stacks of refined data, and laid out her tools. She picked up a fresh vial, the glass smooth and clear under the overhead lamps. She uncapped a new chemical compound, the liquid viscous and pale. Her hands remained steady. She began the measurement, her focus narrowing to the exact drop. The $1 million was a metric of the past. The experiment ahead was the only thing that mattered.